Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, September 23, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America. Downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Robert Kuttner on the stakes 2020 and the survival of American democracy. Also on the program today, Trump admits soliciting Ukrainian election help, but it's okay. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi pretends like she might allow impeachment to move forward. Elizabeth Warren takes the lead in an Iowa poll, Bernie in a dead heat in New Hampshire. Are we nearing a Joe Biden freefall? Speaking of free-falling, Cory Booker announces he has 8 days to raise $2 million. We'll have to quit the race. UN looking to push for more climate action as they get a lashing from a teenage girl. Deserved. Well done. Not my daughter. And while Modi campaigns with Donald Trump, meaning Kashmir can expect no help from the United States.
Also, Tulsi says mahalo. Literally tweeted that out.
Oh, jeez. Bureau of Land Management moves out of D.C. and into offices alongside oil and gas companies. Literally.
Drain the swamp.
All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. First off, allow me to apologize. There's something going on with my voice. I'm not quite sure what it is. I don't know if I have like a cold, a nascent cold, or I just slept on my face incorrectly at one point over the weekend. I'm not sure. So forgive me. We are also skeleton crew today. Just Matt and Brendan here with us. But
it's the efficiency crew.
It is the efficiency crew. I would have to say that, like, if we're going to have a skeleton, that's the skeleton I would want. I don't know what parts of the skeleton are the most important parts of the skeleton, really. But that's a good thing. So you're in good hands, ladies and gentlemen. Another week. This one should be interesting. There are significant calls for the impeachment of Donald Trump. We have now about, what is it, like 140 some odd Democratic Congress people who have signaled that they want to move forward with impeachment of Donald Trump publicly. That is prior to all this stuff about the whistleblower. On Thursday, the Director of National Intelligence, McGuire, acting, I guess, right? They're all acting, will testify in front of the House Intelligence Committee, public testimony. And the question will be, will he hand over the whistleblower complaint and allow for the whistleblower to come and testify to Congress? Now, remember, the Donald Trump appointed Inspector General of the Directorate of National Intelligence has deemed this whistleblower complaint to be valid enough to trigger the statute that requires its reporting to Congress. There is simply no legitimate argument about this. I mean, I haven't seen a single legal scholar who is named come out and say, like, well, no. And so there's no question here that this type of stonewalling should in and of itself be enough for impeachment. Here is Donald Trump. Here's two clips. We have a Donald Trump. Which one? Which should we play the other one first? Yeah. No, I think this is at the UN, and this is where he discusses, I think it's at the UN, where he discusses. Maybe both of these are, where he discusses this phone call, which the Wall Street Journal Friday afternoon reported there were 8 times where Trump asked a question for something. We should remind you that Donald Trump, well, listen to this.
We had a perfect phone call with the president of Ukraine. Everybody knows it. It's just a Democrat witch hunt. Here we go again. They failed with Russia. They failed with recession. They failed with everything. And now they're bringing this up. The one who's got the problem is Biden. Because you look at what Biden did. Biden did what they would like to have me do, except for one problem. I didn't do it. What Biden did is a disgrace. What his son did is a disgrace. The son took money from Ukraine. The son took money from China. A lot of money from China.
Okay, so there's Donald Trump pivoting from it was a nice conversation with the president of Ukraine, and but what I did, what they're accusing me of doing is actually what Biden did. Last night, Donald Trump tweets out that it was a nice call, right? I mean, the fake news media says I pressured the Ukrainian president at least 8 times during my phone call with him. Now, I don't know what that means. You pressured him 8 times. It sounds like he specifically asked a specific question. I don't know how you enumerate 8 pressure points.
It'd be nice to see that transcript.
It would be actually very helpful, I think, for the president, for us to see this. This supposedly comes from a so-called whistleblower who they say doesn't even have a firsthand account of what was said. More Democrat crooked media con. Breaking news, the Ukrainian government just said they weren't pressured at all during a nice call. Sleepy Joe Biden, on the other hand, forced a tough prosecutor out of investigating the son's company. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That's the real story. So that's it. It was just a nice call. There was no pressuring. They just talked about nice things. You know, like you're a good guy. Be good. Good is good.
Just be appropriate.
Be appropriate. Watch your language. And but today at the United Nations, Trump seems to like sort of pivot off that a little bit.
What did you give the Ukrainian president about Joe Biden and his son during your phone call?
Well, you're going to see, because what we are doing is we want honesty. And if we deal with a country, we want honesty. And I think with the new president, you're going to see much more honesty in the Ukraine. And that's what we're looking for. We're supporting a country. We want to make sure that country is honest. It's very important to talk about corruption. If you don't talk about corruption, why would you give money to a country that you think is corrupt? One of the reasons the new president got elected is he was going to stop corruption. So it's very important that on occasion you speak to somebody about corruption. Very important.
Okay. Now, I don't know how your nice phone calls go, but buried in that jibber jabber was an ultimatum. If you're going to support a country, you want them to be honest. Now, on most of my nice phone calls, I don't question the honesty of the people I'm talking to. And then to the extent that I am questioning the honesty, I don't necessarily say, and I'm not going to give you the support that I've given you in the past because I suspect you're dishonest. I just want you to root out corruption. And I'm going to say that 8 times and dangle money in front of you. He almost admits He's like walking up to the line. This is what I surmise is happening. They are very concerned that at one point this transcript is going to get out there by hook or crook. And what he is now already doing is trying to reinterpret the transcript. So when I was saying, you better do this or you're not going to get the money, I was just saying, be honest. Now, the problem that Trump has is that everybody knows he's a complete pathological liar. The one possible saving grace he has is that the one means of holding him to account, and by this, I don't mean Donald Trump is going to be walked out of office. That's not going to happen. Politically, being held to account. In other words, perhaps paying a price politically for doing this. The one thing that could make that happen or that could prevent that from happening is Nancy Pelosi right now. The difference between the Democratic Party not holding him to account and the Republican Party not holding him to account, if you don't understand that dynamic, maybe I can't explain it to you, but it is so massive and so obvious in the context of a two-party political system heading into a presidential election year. Right now, Donald Trump's criminal behavior is on Nancy Pelosi because she is next in line to respond to it. Nobody else can. She is the only one now who can say, we're going to take the brakes off of this impeachment stuff, or we're going to keep the brakes on. That's it. There's no one else. Mitch McConnell is not on the hook for this until Nancy Pelosi does her job. That's just the reality of this politics. Not to mention the idea that the Speaker of the House is not going to give cover to whomever is the Democratic nominee. And by cover, I simply mean not to cover up their wrongdoing, if there was any wrongdoing. And frankly, I don't know that there was. But political cover. We can see what's going on. The New York Times is reporting this literally in the first paragraph of their story on Joe Biden. Is the Times has no evidence of anything that was corrupt or any law breaking. And then it just goes on to talk about it for paragraphs. And but the fact of the matter is it's a fairly nuanced situation in which I think very hard to say that there's no sort of structural corruption here, because there is. But it's not illegal. And I'm not apologizing for it at all. And frankly, I think, if it was up to me, it would be disqualifying only because it is a huge liability going into an election like this. And the fact of the matter is, I think like with other candidates, if there was a similar dynamic, I don't think it would be as problematic, to be honest with you. But here's the deal. Let's just get this out of the way. So Joe Biden's son, Hunter, is being paid at one point something like $50,000 a month to sit on the board of a Ukrainian energy company. Now, I don't know what Hunter Biden's specialty is, but I would be very, very hard pressed to believe that Hunter Biden had some type of like doctorate in Ukrainian energy markets or supplies. But his father at the time was vice president. Is that illegal? No. Is it corrupt in the way that our government has become corrupted, like broadly? Yes. Does that mean that Joe Biden did anything wrong? No. In fact, it appears from the reporting now that what Joe Biden was doing was pushing out or helping to push out a prosecutor whom other governments, including the U.S. Government, felt was not doing enough to pursue corruption. In fact, this prosecutor had suspended the investigation on the company that Hunter Biden was working for. And Joe Biden was pushing this guy out for a prosecutor who would be more aggressive in going after this corruption. Now, it's quite possible that Joe Biden was doing this with the knowledge of like, I can push for this. We need less corruption there and my son will be fine. You know, there was probably nothing illicit at all about him being paid this money. But we all know why it was. It was because they were hoping to get influence. That's the problem we have with lobbying. That's the problem that we have with paid speeches. That's the problem we have with all this. But it's not nearly as illicit as what Donald Trump has done. And so the question is like, how do you, if Joe Biden ends up being the nominee, how do you deal with this? And for Nancy Pelosi to be sitting on her duff, protecting, or what she thinks is protecting some of these frontline Democrats in the House, which I think is dubious, particularly based upon all the data, is absurd. It's absurd. Playing this type of defense, this defensive posture, this four corners that they're playing is going to hurt the Democrats. And I mean, if it was up to me, I would say Joe Biden drop out, because the reality is the media is not fair. This sucks. It's not a good look. And this is too important of an election. And the problem that Joe Biden has that is unique to Joe Biden, because if Bernie Sanders' son was getting paid by the same company, I think it would be far less of a problem. If Elizabeth Warren, if Pete Buttigieg's husband was being paid by the same company in the same fashion, I think it would be less of a problem. Pick whatever candidate it is. The problem that Joe Biden has is, what is Joe Biden running on? I'm not corrupt. Donald Trump is corrupt. He's undercutting American values. I'm not going to do that. He is besmirching the office. I will restore its dignity. The problem is Joe Biden is running on his personal attributes and character and his integrity, and this strikes to the heart of that. All the other candidates, not all, but for the vast majority of them, are running on a series of policy platforms. Some I like, some I don't like, whatever. Their candidacy is not so contingent upon who they are as individuals. Trump is going to try and do it. He's going to try and do it. He's going to say crazy Bernie, or he's going to say, Pocahontas, or he's going to say, what does he say about Buttigieg? Like Little Pete, or whatever it is. He's going to attack them as their individuals. But the problem he has with that is that these people actually have policy sets and they're basing their campaigns on that. Joe Biden's not. That's why Joe Biden has a liability that's unique to him. And Nancy Pelosi is exacerbating it. This is just incompetence by, frankly, I want to say a generation of Democrats, but it's really a generational mindset that these two Democratic leaders are stuck in. And it's going to screw us all, frankly. Good time to talk to Robert Kuttner about the stakes in 2020 today. Before we do, you spend 1/3 of your life in your sheets, right? I guess I'm not going to make any comments about others who do. But
sometimes it's more.
Right. Don't you want them to be insanely comfortable? I do. I love my sheets. And they've been named the winner of the best online bedding category by Good Housekeeping. But guess what? I don't need Good Housekeeping to tell me this. Brooklinen offers luxury sheets, towels, bedding, and more without the luxury markup. I just got a Brooklinen pillow, too. I don't mention that in here, but I got a pillow. Over 20 plus colors and patterns you can mix and match. These sheets don't just feel great, they look great, too. It's true. My whole bedding game has been elevated. Not just from a I can sleep better perspective, but it also looks better. I have sheets that look like an adult now. And I'm not terribly consistent with my washing, but I can mix and match with these things. They all seem to go together, or at least I think I did a fairly decent job of picking a couple of different sets that fit nicely. Super comfortable. They're the most comfortable sheets I've ever slept on. High quality. I got the cool, crisp, classic cotton ones. Their towels have turned my bathroom into a spa. My pillow, it's hard to find a pillow I like. I love it. Couldn't recommend them more. Friends, family, treating yourself to an upgrade you deserve. And now Brooklinen.com is giving an exclusive offer to just my listeners. Get 10% off and free shipping when you use the promo code majority at Brooklinen. Brooklinen is so confident in their product that all their sheets, comforters, towels come with a lifetime warranty. The only way to get 10% off and free shipping is to use promo code majority at brooklinen.com. That's Brooklinen, BROOKLINEN.com, promo code majority. Brooklinen, these are the best sheets ever. All of these products I use today. That's the thing, is that I've rejected, I think, 4 different advertisers this past week. Some because it's just industries that we won't do. I'm not going to name any names, but I'm not going to do a chemical company that used to belong to another chemical company that has done some bad things to the environment. I'm not going to do any financial services or, anything to that ilk. And then I have some like retail things that like I've tried the product, I didn't like it, and I don't want to push it. But these I use. Not only do I sleep, I eat. And nutrition's on everybody's minds. People are trying to eat better. What, when, and how much to eat. It's a mess of conflicting information. It can confuse anybody. Kettlebell Kitchen knows that meal planning isn't one size fits all. It's why they offered a personalized solution. This is, I feel like, is something that's also like super millennial too. It's the convenience I really like about this too. Kettlebell's kitchen goal is to achieve yours with meal plans that are tailored to your needs. You can sign up for a plan or order a la carte, no long-term contracts required. Food is delivered to your door twice a week. All their meals are dairy-free, soy-free, artificial sweetener-free, and made from ingredients that are naturally free of gluten. You can even filter your choices by calorie, by protein, by fat, by carb limits, so you get exactly the right food for your unique needs. So when I'm not with the kids, this is how I've been eating. I don't have time to make as much food. I'm not as dedicated. And when I'm with the kids, I make the food more. But when I'm alone, I want to be able to eat a good meal. And I don't want to have to worry about, like, I'm trying to get a little more fit. Sometimes I fall off the wagon a little bit with cookies in the studio. But Kettlebell Kitchen has been extremely helpful. And I think it's going to be a much bigger part of my diet going forward. They got stuff like you can get huevo ranchos. What do you call that? Huevos rancheros. And I had these wild salmon cakes. They give you greens. They give you wild salmon cakes. They got like chicken Waldorf. They got some vegetarian offers if you want. And you can do it like a keto meal or just a heavy protein meal. You can completely structure these things. Feed the champion in you with Kettlebell Kitchen. Go to kettlebellkitchen.com, enter the code majority for $50 off your first 2 orders for new customers. That's $50 off your first 2 orders at kettlebellkitchen.com, code majority. As always, check out our podcast notes for links to this. And lastly, this is a golden age of television and podcasts. Everybody understands the value of a compelling narrative. Cue Hunt a Killer. It's the murder mystery box that immerses you in an ongoing experience. This is pretty awesome. So you get in each, they call it seasons, right? Because it's sort of structured like a murder mystery. You get 6 episodes per season. And with each one, you dive deeper into like the feeling of being a detective. They send you documents. They send you evidence, case files. You've got to go through this and figure it out. You're not staring at a screen. You can build, the bulletin board, the investigation board with friends, or you can do it online if you need to. But you help each other through every challenge. I'm doing it with my kid, but it's also, I think, something that like people used to, have like a little parlor game type of situation. You get a little bit older. Maybe that's like a boomer thing. I don't know. I'm joking. Plus, part of the proceeds of every box goes to the Cold Case Foundation to help fund cold case investigations. It's a lot of fun. It's nice to do like a game that is really sort of compelling. And Milo was like a big SVU fan, not SVU, Law and Order, just the generic Law and Order. And I was like, are you into this? She was. Right now, just for our listeners, you can go to huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. They only accept 200 members per day, so hard to take advantage of this offer. That's huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. Head over to the website. You can see what this is all about. It's pretty self-explanatory. huntakiller.com/majority. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Like I say, all of those... we have links to all of those ads in our podcast description. If you're a member of the program, you won't hear those ads, but you can go and check out the deals that we have and then check out the websites. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. We cut out the ads. We give you extra content every day. Jointhemajorityreport.com. You support the free show, and we give you extra bonuses. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Robert Kuttner, founder of the American Prospect, on the stakes 2020 and the survival of American democracy. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program the co-founder and co-editor of the American Prospect, former columnist for Business Week, Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the Ida and Meyer Kirstein Chair at Brandeis University, and author of his latest, The Stakes 2020 and the Survival of American Democracy. Robert Kuttner, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
I hope that this audience perceives the stakes here, at least, in the immediate sense. But just walk us through how you perceive Donald Trump has, I guess, for lack of a better term, grown in this office, and why he is on a trajectory that, if reelected, becomes that much worse.
You know, what's really bizarre is that on the one hand, he's become more psychiatrically impaired, and on the other hand, he's become more competent at subverting American democracy. So, for instance, for the first couple of years, he had minders. He had mainstream minders at the Justice Department as White House chiefs of staff. He had the three generals who were at the Pentagon and at National Security Administration, Homeland Security. After his first 2 years in office, he shook all of them off. You know, Steve Bannon was worried that the so-called deep state would constrain Donald Trump. Well, the deep state is not doing that as effectively as it did. The offsetting news, of course, is that despite all the messing with democracy, the Democrats were able to flip 43 Republican House seats. So at least you now got one House that is able to investigate Trump, and he doesn't have wall-to-wall control of the government. But there are so many things that he could do in a second term that he hasn't quite gotten around to yet, that he hasn't figured out yet. I mean, he's trying to get control of the police agencies, the IRS, the FBI, the CIA. He's sort of done that. He hasn't totally done it. He could launch an all-out war against the press through prosecutions under the 1917 Espionage Act, where reporters would be vulnerable for prosecutions if they happen to refer to classified material, which they have a perfect right to do if they haven't signed a national security oath. And I go through all the stuff in the book that he could do in a second. He could go after nonprofits. He could sick the IRS on nonprofits and get them caught up in technical violations. And of course, progressive groups are much more dependent on nonprofit status than conservative groups who have all the corporate money they need. So the alarmist part, I don't think your listeners need a tutorial on that. I mean, we all know all of the things to be alarmed about if Trump wins a second term. I think the more important part of the book is the argument that in order to win, and to win big, and to win beyond the margin of theft, the Democrats need to nominate an economic progressive, because it's those issues where Trump was able to steal the Democrats' clothes in 2016, and it's those issues where a progressive Democrat can really draw a distinction between what we stand for and what he stands for, and win back some of those voters who defected to Trump on social issues, on identity issues, on issues where Hillary was correctly perceived to be in bed with Wall Street. And voters just concluded that they're all a bunch of scoundrels, and I might as well vote for somebody who's going to blow it up, and maybe I'll get some of the pieces.
Or I think maybe even more substantial is those people who said they're both scoundrels, I'm staying home. Or I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave the presidency blank. There was a tremendous amount of those type of votes in Wisconsin.
But participation was way down.
Right. But before we get to that, let's just go. I just want to go back. Like when we talk about his subversion of democracy, like where is the delineation between just policy sets that are indicative of what's been happening over the past 40 years? And, you know, that are making our country sort of like, I don't know how to articulate this, more softly less democratic, right? Like just less egalitarian, I guess, on some respect, or where the spoils of society are being hoarded by few, and where the costs and responsibilities of society are being dispersed specifically to those who are not getting the spoils of society, as it were. And
there are...
Well, yeah, I mean, where do you delineate? Like, is all that anti-democratic, or are you talking about like specific institutions when you talk about he could be taking over the IRS, or he could be attacking specifically?
Yeah.
I mean,
Sam, it's a very important distinction, and my whole point in this book is that there's a connection between these two things. So on the one hand, you know, you have rule of law, due process, courts as an independent branch of government, all that stuff. And we know how Trump runs roughshod over that. On the other hand, we have all the stuff that's been going on over the past 30 years where concentrated economic power turns into concentrated political power, which gives economic elites more power to rig the rules against regular people so that they get more and more of the spoils and ordinary people get less and less of a reasonable share of the economy. Now, those things came together in 2016, and I think they need to be attacked as a common problem. That's why I think it's so important that we nominate and elect a progressive, because if you can run the economy in such a way that it's not so highly concentrated, that Wall Street doesn't get to make all the rules, that regular people get more benefit, then, people start believing in democracy again. It's no accident that there was no support for dictatorship anywhere in the West in the 30 or 40 years after World War II, because the economy was delivering for regular people. And that in turn meant that the political system had some legitimacy. And when the economy loses legitimacy, the political system loses legitimacy. So you got to take back both things at the same time and turn what has been a vicious circle back into a virtuous circle.
And to be fair, I mean, we're also talking post-World War II. We're also talking the world had a fairly bad taste in its mouth about dictators and authoritarians, and also I think at least in this country, not everybody was participating in this great expansion, this economic expansion, or at least in terms of political participation. And so how much, before we go forward as to what the solution is, how much responsibility do you perceive Democrats in having a stake or a role in what culminated with Donald Trump? I mean, on some level, the leap, Donald Trump wins by a razor thin, almost impossibly thin margin. I guess maybe 2000 was also pretty razor thin. But the fact of the matter that it was that close, that you have the ability for a fluke like that to happen, is indicative of something really going off the rails in American society. I mean, you just mentioned what Trump could do in terms of prosecuting journalists. The Obama administration more or less did the same, it seems to me, or pretty darn close, and certainly set the table. How much of the Democrats up to this point how much responsibility do they bear in what has happened in the past, 30, 40 years?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So if you start with Clinton, really, or even to some extent with Carter, who was a big supporter of deregulation of the economy and did not do much, if anything, for trade unions, you had three presidencies in a row where on civil rights issues, Democrats were pretty good, but on economic issues, they were terrible. They were okay on the environment. They were okay on a few other issues, but on the big question of who governs capitalism, Bill Clinton was worse than either President Bush in terms of taking the lead on deregulating Wall Street, which in turn led to the collapse of 2008, which in turn screwed more than 10 million homeowners, and really came back to haunt Mrs. Clinton in 2016. And Obama, who really had an opportunity, right? He's elected president mainly because the economy collapses on George W. Bush's watch, and the economy collapses in September of 2008, and the Republican nominee, John McCain, does a terrible job of presenting himself as a persuasive leader in an economic crisis, and Obama looks pretty good. So he gets elected. And what does he do? He appoints Bill Clinton's team, the same guys who gave us deregulation, Geithner, Summers, Bernanke, to fix it. And what do? Instead of breaking up the banks, they bail out the banks. So on the big economic issues that cost Democrats credibility with ordinary working people, the Democrats were about as bad as the Republicans. And what happened in 2016, and Steve Bannon was the master strategist there, I mean, you meld together economic nationalism with resentment on the part of working people that their economic status has gone down the drain, that's all mixed together with cultural resentments about women, about African Americans, and you package it so that it's resentment against the status quo, and a lunatic like Trump can get elected president. And Hillary is frosting on the cake. She's taking $500,000 speaking fees from Wall Street, and people say, you know, what the hell? They're all the same, Democrats, Republicans. Let's vote for a complete outsider. So on the question of economic concentration and ordinary working people not getting a decent shake, Democrats are equally culpable. On the issue of whether you honor process democracy, I think the Republicans are a lot worse. I mean, Gingrich and then McConnell, you know, they ran the show so that there was no legitimate role for the opposition party. They played much rougher on the Supreme Court. They made much more abusive use of emergency presidential power. And so on the process issues, the Democrats were better. But unfortunately, you don't get elected as a process liberal. You get elected based on whether you're perceived as delivering for ordinary people. And on that basis, the Democrats got into bed with Wall Street, and Trump was the result. So my point is, we better not repeat that in 2020. And when Joe Biden says, well, Trump is an aberration, we got to return to normal, the answer to that is, hey, normal wasn't good enough. Normal, economically, was what elected Donald Trump.
So, I want to go further into that question as to why, as to, you know, how you see this playing out with the election. I mean, we're already starting to see some of Biden's support start to, I guess, drop as more and more people. Something I think the latest I've seen is 9% of Democratic voters have made up their mind for sure. So there's a lot of fluidity in where people are, although it seems to be still sort of maintained around the top three candidates. Just play this out for us. I mean, Joe Biden supposedly appeals to these, we're told anyways, appeals to the Midwesterners who abandoned the Democrats or who didn't show up for the Democrats. We also know that he has a certain amount of appeal amongst older African-American voters, which is substantial. They're obviously a major cohort in terms of supporting Democrats. I mean, what is the formula here, aside from just sort of why are, if what you're saying is the case, that people don't want to return to normal, why are we not seeing that quite yet?
Well, you are really starting to see it. So let's take them one at a time. I mean, Biden barely holds it together. I mean, Biden is kind of past his pull date, leaving aside where he is on the issue.
Well, right. I mean, I think that is actually sort of like let's put that aside for a moment, because I do think that actually ultimately may be the most important factor, because even the people who support Biden's issue sets, I think, are starting to sort of say, like, this is a guy who is, I keep using this phrase, leaking oil. That, this may not be the best vehicle even for our, even for this specific issue set. But putting that aside.
Well, but stay on that for a second, because you really can't put it aside. I mean, the candidate as a person becomes bundled with the candidate's views on the issues. And because he keeps tripping over himself, it's not even clear where he stands on some issues. I also think, this business with Trump, trying to use the Ukrainians to investigate Hunter Biden is really going to hurt Biden as well as Trump, because it's going to reinforce this notion that they're all a bunch of scoundrels. Trump has kids who are corrupt. Well, maybe Biden has a kid who's corrupt, and they're all a bunch of scoundrels. And I think this is going to hurt Biden, independently of all the other stuff that's going to hurt Biden. The other thing that's going on is that Warren is really very interesting. I mean, the Des Moines Register poll came out on Sunday, and it shows the first choice of Iowa voters likely to vote in the precinct caucuses, 22 for Warren, 20 for Biden, 11 for Sanders. And there's this mysterious quality called momentum, and Warren seems to have it, and the other two don't seem to have it. And just let me also speak to the question of older African American voters. You take a lot of this is the Obama halo effect, and you start taking a closer look at Obama's record on race, whether it's school integration or whether it's long prison sentences or whether it's tactically getting into bed with some pretty nasty Republican senators. The more and more that comes to light, I think the more his support among African Americans is going to dwindle. There was a piece in the Times, I think yesterday, about younger African Americans trying to persuade their parents and their grandparents that Biden ain't so great. And as more and more attention is focused on the election, I think you're going to see more and more of that happening. Warren is interesting in this regard because, for 15 years, she has been fighting the banks on the whole question of fair mortgages for African Americans, and the kind of second-tier leadership in the black community is very, very aware of that. So I think the expectations are so high for the Southern primaries on Super Tuesday, where about 60% of the electorate in the Democratic Party is African American, that if Biden underperforms there, that's going to be devastating. And I think the expectations are so high that I don't see how he can possibly meet them. To me, the thing I most worry about is the point at which Bernie Sanders realizes that his nemesis is Elizabeth Warren. And then what happens? Because both of them can't get nominated. And then how ugly and nasty does it get? I mean, Democrats, are famous for doing each other in and screwing up a sure thing. And we've never had a situation where we had an embarrassment of riches on the progressive side. So now we got two front runners who are both progressives. And how does that play out?
I mean, it seems to me that that Elizabeth Warren, without Bernie Sanders in the race, and it's quite conceivable, right, that Elizabeth Warren could find that Bernie Sanders is her nemesis as well at one point.
They cancel each other out. That's right.
They cancel each other, but they also protect each other. It seems to me, because if it was just Warren and Biden right now in the race, or just Sanders and Biden in the race, I think that that they would be under constant assault.
I agree with you, and it's almost like a prisoner's dilemma. Which one of them defects first and starts, having their surrogates snipe at the other one? This happened last week when Sanders was asleep at the switch and Warren won the Working Families Party endorsement, and there was a lot of sniping in the Twitter sphere and a lot of sniping in the left-wing press that this endorsement was somehow underhandedly stolen from Sanders, because the Working Families Party did endorse Sanders last time. So you're going to the more, if in fact Warren continues to overtake Sanders, and there's every evidence that could well happen, you're going to see more and more of this sniping. But they do protect each other in the following sense. I mean, even though Warren chooses not to call herself a socialist, she's every bit as radical on the whole question of how you reform American capitalism and what you do about it as Sanders is. And in some respects, she's better at it because she's a closer student of it. Bernie's kind of a socialist from 30,000 feet, whereas Warren has spent the last 20 years really looking at the details of American capitalism up close and personal, which is why she's got all these highly detailed plans on what to do. And it's very funny. Some people kind of on the center left who I talk to sort of say, well, at least Warren isn't as bad as Sanders. Well, just between us and your listeners, if you were Goldman Sachs, Warren is every bit as bad as Sanders and probably a lot more effective.
I think that's true in the context of Goldman Sachs, but let me ask you, this is a nice segue into a question that I have. I think there's a lot of folks who would say, it is the case that Warren is for a lot of reform, extreme reform and regulation. Antitrust is a big part of that, and diminishing the power of capital by making them, providing more competition amongst them. What do you say to those people who say that Sanders fundamentally is for a greater restructuring of, a greater assault on the structures that inevitably keep bringing us back to this place. Because if, let's say, Piketty's argument is that rather than us straying from where we were during the Great Compression, that, those years, that the Great Compression was actually an anomaly. That under the context of capitalism as we're currently structured, that it is inevitable that we're going to go back to society, that you can undo regulations. We just talked about Bill Clinton deregulating the banks, that we certainly saw the regulatory framework of Obama being unraveled, that you need to have much bigger, bolder programs that are sustainable, and that Sanders' approach is a little bit more universal in the way that he configures these programs.
Let me address both parts of the question. So I think if you look at the details of Warren's strategy for restructuring how corporations are organized, what they have to do, if you look at her plan for cutting private equity off at the knees, if you look at what each of them would do for trade unions, if you look at what each of them would do to break up economic concentration, Warren is every bit as radical as Sanders and probably a lot better on the details. But let me come back to this Thomas Piketty question. He's a very good statistical historian. He's a lousy political economist. And he leaves out politics. The reason that the income distribution got more equal between Roosevelt and LBJ was for one simple reason. Working people were mobilized, and progressives were the dominant tendency in American politics. Now, the Vietnam War screwed that up. It sort of broke the New Deal, Great Society coalition into hard hats and hippies, and then a little bit later you had backlash against the effort by Johnson to pass civil rights legislation. But the whole story of the post-war boom in Europe and the U.S. is that when the working class is mobilized, you can fight capitalism to a draw. You can regulate the hell out of it. You can have strongly empowered trade unions. You can have a lot of social income. And lo and behold, you can keep capitalism in its box, where entrepreneurship creates innovation, but the financial elites don't run the whole political economy. So I think the hope here is that you mobilize regular people, you get them to appreciate that they have common class interests which transcend racial division, so that Trump and Bannon can't play their game of racial division, and you take back the politics, and then you take back the economy. That's the hope. It's not easy, but it's possible.
But if you get to that point, why would you allow, if you look at capitalism's power like a balloon, right, where you're basically saying, that under the right circumstances, if people garner enough and generate enough political strength, they can match capitalism to a draw. But isn't that really one half of the argument as to why you should actually have more structural change? Because if you have that ability at that moment, why not, instead of deflating the tire, why not just put a big hole in it and not allow that tire to reflate?
Well, look, people like me are in favor of a good deal of direct public ownership, right? There's a wonderful book that I recommend by Ganesh Siddharaman, who's one of Warren's chief advisors, called Public Options, where Ganesh says, okay, let's have public banking. Let's have public banking through the post office. Let's have public Medicare. Let's have public this. Let's have public that. And by having more and more of the economy offering public options to compete with private options, that's a kind of socialism. I mean, Roosevelt was for this. Roosevelt was for public power. Roosevelt was for public role in banking. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't include some socialistic aspects of this. But, unless you want the government to take over the whole economy, which I don't think is what most Americans want, I do think it's possible to have an economy that has a lot of public ownership, a lot of public regulation, and the single most important part of this is strongly empowered workers, because that's where you get your political majority. And we have a historic record that this can actually work. But you need your people mobilized politically all of the time, because if the economy is even partly capitalistic, the capitalists claw back a lot of power, and that's the story of the last 40 years. So you're right, but I'm not sure where your tire metaphor goes. You need to really limit their political power. You need to constrain what they can do economically. You need to countervail it with public institutions. But I'm not a Bolshevik. I mean, I don't think you put the private sector out of business. And I don't even think Bernie Sanders thinks that.
No, I would agree. I mean, I think, I guess it's more about places where questions that, I think at one point Warren was asked the question about climate change. And it was framed in the question of climate change, which I think it's sort of less relevant, but about nationalizing the power distribution in this country. Yep. And that is an example of me, to me, my mind, and I agree with you. I not only would I be against it, I don't think Bernie Sanders is close to saying that there shouldn't be markets or you nationalize everything. But it's a question of like which power centers, which things that generate the ultimately what becomes a plutocracy do you say, like, this is how we're going to pull the hole in that tire? We're not going to allow you to accumulate this much power, and we're going to do it in such a way that that is more structural, that Robert Bork 2.0 can't come back in and redefine what antitrust means, and therefore this is not going to be so easily reversible.
Well, public power is a very good example. I mean, public power is more efficient than private power. It's also more environment friendly. So I'm all in favor of expanding public power and reducing privately owned power companies. But the way to keep Robert Bork 2.0 from coming back in is to make sure that you don't elect presidents who are going to appoint guys like Bork. And there's another case, by the way, where the Democrats were every bit as bad as the Republicans. I mean, antitrust was euthanized under Democrats as well as Republicans. It's another case of both parties getting into bed with Wall Street. So I think there are some things you need to do structurally to put capitalism back in its box. The way you do that is to get elected.
Right.
And the way you get elected is to motivate and mobilize people that you're going to make a constructive difference in their lives.
And I should just say, we had Ganesh Sitaraman on the program back in 2017, talking about the crisis of the middle-class constitution. But maybe we should have back on for this latest book, because it sounds fantastic. All right. Well, let me. So with that said, and I think I think this country would be so much better off. It would be such a massive upgrade in my mind, whether it's Bernie or Warren as the president. And the prospect this week has come out with an extended edition on what can be done literally on day one in terms of executive action. And we're going to be talking to David Dayen on Wednesday about that.
Right.
But let me ask you this: since we're this is so oriented towards the 2020 election, I think we're on the same page in terms of our concern about Biden and our hopes for someone from the progressive wing of the party to win the nomination and ultimately the presidency. Where do you see impeachment fitting in this? Like, how problematic, or maybe you don't think it is at all, that Nancy Pelosi is basically, as far as I can tell, trying to play like a four corners game, starting almost before halftime.
Yeah, I think everything changed this weekend. I have said for a long time that I think bring it on. I mean, I think impeachment is a good thing to do because it keeps Trump on the defensive, and it puts all of his various sins into the spotlight, and then it puts the Senate on the Republican Senate on the defensive going into an election. How can you possibly be defending this guy? Now, Pelosi, I think, because the more centrist Democrats were nervous about this, was trying to keep peace in the caucus. But I think this weekend, the evidence that came out of Trump using a foreign government, not only using a foreign government, but threatening a foreign government with the withholding of aid unless they went after one of his political opponents, that has to push Pelosi over the line. And one by one, in the last 24 hours, you've had more centrist Democrats saying, I'm sorry, this is too much, and I will be amazed if this doesn't turn into a full-blown impeachment investigation with Pelosi's support. Yeah, she had to be dragged kicking and screaming, but I think now she's going to be on board with that, and I think that's nothing but good, because I think when Trump is seriously on the defensive, he does crazier and crazier stuff. And I think it puts Republicans in a real box when they're asked, how can you possibly defend this guy? And, this was exactly the trajectory that Watergate followed, that for the first 2 years, people who favored impeachment were thought of as fringe, and then it gradually became mainstream, and then it became inevitable.
Let me ask you this, because you've been watching this stuff and you've been closer to it, I think, over the years than most. Where is Chuck Schumer? I mean, maybe I'm letting my bias show a little bit, but I mean, is it possible that Nancy Pelosi? I mean, one of the things that we saw during the immigration funding that happened a couple of months ago, that Pelosi had a bill, it went to the Senate, it got shattered. And then came back, and she had to accept what came from the Senate, and it caused a pretty big rift between her and some of the squad and others. To what extent do you think Nancy Pelosi is just concerned that Chuck Schumer can't deliver the majority or enough of a majority of his own caucus in the Senate? I mean, nobody expects Mitch McConnell to do anything. But if Mitch McConnell holds a vote and 5 or 6 Democrats, and I don't know who they would be, but, decide to vote with the Republicans against impeachment. I mean, is it possible that Nancy Pelosi is just afraid that Chuck Schumer can't do his job?
Well, Pelosi is a better progressive. There's two parts of this. She's a better progressive than Schumer is, and she happens to be the speaker in a chamber that has a Democratic majority, so that her job is somewhat easier. Schumer is more of a Wall Street Democrat than Pelosi, and he's got a minority, and he can't hold his caucus. So, on a bad day, you've got as many as 13 or 14 centrist Democrats in the Senate who will vote with Republicans. There was an amendment last year to weaken the Dodd-Frank Act, and 14 Democrats in the Senate defected and voted with the Republicans. Why? Because they thought that this was inside baseball, that their constituents really didn't care about, the detailed regulations, and they could get away with this vote and satisfy their donors. So this is tough stuff. On the other hand, if Trump is really on the ropes, they revert to partisan Democrats, and they would like to be the majority. And if the Republicans suffer a serious defeat in 2020, it's more likely that the Democrats take majority control of the Senate. There are now 11 Republican-held seats that are considered vulnerable in play in 2020. There's only one Democratic seat, the Alabama seat, and even that seat may be okay if Roy Moore gets the Republican nomination again. So even though Schumer is something of a Wall Street guy, doesn't totally control his own caucus, he would much rather be majority leader than be minority leader. And I think that partisan impulse comes to the fore once the House actually votes impeachment, and then it's up to the Senate.
Why is this generation of Democrats why is that partisan impulse so dead inside them, it seems to me? Like, I mean, ideologically, someone like AOC is, I think, at least it appears to the left of them. But what really strikes me is that she's also much more ferociously aggressive in terms of partisanship.
I don't think it's just generational. I mean, Sherrod Brown, who's I think 66, is among the most progressive Democrats in the Senate. Elizabeth Warren is 70. Bernie's going to be 78. So, yeah, to some extent, a new generation, the AOC generation, can rediscover a kind of grassroots radicalism, and that's great. I think so many of the Democrats in the Senate are basically corporate Democrats, and it's a reflection of all the power that Wall Street has and the relative destruction of the labor movement. But you get people mobilized. You can elect progressive Democrats. Look at Montana. I mean, some very unlikely places have been able to send progressives to the Senate. But when Wall Street has so much power, in a lot of states, the Democrat, will try and raise a lot of corporate money. And then if you raise a lot of corporate money, you can't be all that left wing. And then you've got a centrist faction that pulls down the Democrats as a progressive party. That's why you get a majority leader like Chuck Schumer, who's Wall Street's guy in Washington.
Well, Robert Kuttner, the stakes 2020 and the survival of American democracy. I guess we'll have a better notion within a couple of months as to what the trajectory, I think, of this race is. Lastly, let me just ask you this. What do you think the chances are for a brokered convention? I mean, this comes up every year, but it sort of feels like to me that I can imagine a Joe Biden saying, like, I'm not going to drop out. Bernie Sanders, I don't know why he would drop out. He seems like he's going to have donors all the way through. I imagine that Elizabeth Warren will as well. And certainly from, I can understand, Biden seems to be sort of somewhat rigid in his thinking. Warren could theoretically be extremely well positioned, and Sanders could be thinking like, at the end of the day, I need to. I'm building a movement, and so this is, I'm not just running for president. I'm building a movement still. What do you think the chances are for a brokered convention?
Well, first of all, I think by March or April, there's probably only going to be about 5 people still in it. And with the 15% rule, you got to win 15% of the vote in a given state to have any delegates at all. So maybe there are going to be 5 people with delegates if Buttigieg stays moderately strong and if Kamala stays moderately strong. So then the question is, what does the horse trading look like? And who's the front runner? So if Elizabeth Warren is the front runner, and I think she will be. I mean, I would bet that she'll have more delegates than anybody else, even if she comes into the convention without a majority. So then how does this play out? I mean, what could she offer Buttigieg? What could she offer Harris? What, for that matter, could she offer Bernie? And can you imagine any scenario? I mean, let's say I'm making this up, but let's say Warren has 40% of the delegates, and Biden has 30, and Bernie has 25. So everybody else is to the right of Bernie. I can't imagine a scenario where he's the nominee. I certainly can't imagine a scenario where Biden's the nominee because everybody else is to the left of him. So you just get a lot of horse trading. I mean, maybe there's somebody who has enough delegates that Warren puts that person on the ticket as vice president, and that gives her 50 plus 1. But whether it's a brokered convention, meaning we get through the first ballot and nobody has a majority, and then the horse trading starts for real, I think an awful lot of the horse trading is going to happen after the last primary but before the convention. I would still think the odds are we will know who the nominee is on day one of the convention, but that might not happen. I think there's a better chance that we won't know and that it does go more than one ballot than at any time in the last 50 years. Last time this happened was 1952. I mean, we thought this was going to happen in 60, but Kennedy got to the W's before he had a majority. So you got to go back to 52 before you had a convention that went more than one ballot.
The Stakes, 2020 and the Survival of American Democracy. Robert Kuttner, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Cheers. Bye.
Bye. There it is, folks. We got to turn the air conditioning back on. It was a little rough getting there. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. It seems to me it's quite possible. Sanders also might have more delegates going into that convention. Just turned out the air conditioner, and there was a very strange, rickety noise in there. I think that fan is getting.
It went away the last time.
Yeah, we'll just wait for it to work itself out. But there you have it. I have yet to meet anybody who is not nervous about Joe Biden. I mean, granted, Kuttner comes from, the more progressive side of the party, but it's hard to meet people really in any place in the party who are not worried about Joe Biden.
It's almost like conventional wisdom, it seems like.
It honestly, it's not quite conventional wisdom because nobody's saying it out loud. Nobody wants to be the first one, I think, who are sort of like in the centrist clique to say that Joe Biden has lost a step. And this is not to say, and I, when I was comparing the squad to the Democratic leadership, what I'm really talking about is not necessarily just a function of age. This is separate from Biden, but it's a function of like when people attained power. The fact of the matter is Bernie, Warren, Sherrod Brown, they have not been power players in the Senate for the vast majority of their careers. I mean, Warren, coming in, it's just not, they haven't been in that position. More recently, I think, all of them have been ascendant, but, and so there's a generational problem in terms of the leadership in the Democratic Party, I think, without a doubt. And with Biden, I think it's like, look, you can be, I don't know how old Biden is, 70, 78, 76, 70. You could be 78 and be spry. 76.
He turned 77 on November 20th.
Yeah, I think Bernie's actually older than him, and I just don't think that anybody could sit down with those two guys, regardless of what you think of their politics, and say they're aging at the same rate. It's just not. It's just not the case. And while first order for me is Joe Biden's policies in terms of who I would prefer. His ability, which I think is now unique amongst Democrats, to lose in the general election, is becoming more and more prominent in the things that are keeping me up at night. With that said, folks, you don't need to know all the things that keep me up at night. You really don't want to. You don't want to know. One of those is how to fashion a better appeal to join the Majority Report. Should I say just jointhemajorityreport.com or go to jointhemajorityreport.com and join the Majority Report? Just pennies a day. You support the free part of this program, and then we give you extra content every day. And we throw in, every now and then when we remember, we got to get our systems in place more to do the deep archive thing. Maybe David, our Majority Report fellow, can just remind everybody about that.
Yeah, who I don't think we introduced last week when he was here his first day, but
we'll introduce him soon. Soft launch for that fellowship.
A little Easter egg if you want to go back and watch last week's episode.
There you go. Jointhemajorityreport.com. All sorts of member benefits as well as supporting this free show. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. We have a logo, or we've just about landed on our AM Quickie logo, which means that we're so close to launching on the other, on its own feed. And when we do, you got to sign up for that because I don't know. I guess it would, sign up before it on like Stitcher or whatever your podcast app is so that we can push it up to the top. I don't know if iTunes is still doing their podcast ratings anymore. They seem to be all messed up.
Yeah, it's a ghost town over there.
Also, Hunt a Killer is the murder mystery box that immerses you in an ongoing experience with every delivery, or episode as they call it. You dive deeper into what it's like to being a detective without all the hassle from your family. Like, what are you doing? Why are you locking yourself in the room? Like, 'cause you're not really a detective. But you're sifting through piles of documents, evidence, case files until you crack the case. This is like those situations where like people start smoking cigarettes. So they just come in I don't know. Right now, you just for our listeners, you can go to huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. They only accept 200 members per day, so hard to take advantage of this offer. That's huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. huntakiller.com/majority. Tomorrow's Tuesday. Check out TMBS on its YouTube channel or wherever your podcasts are served. Also, The Antifada, available on patreon.com/The Antifada. And Matt?
Coming up on Literary Hangover soon, I'll let Cornel West introduce the next figure we're talking about.
Wow.
It's not going to be a matter of just pointing out white supremacy. Of course, white supremacy is fundamental foundation and part of the country. It's not the only foundation, because you got resistance to white supremacy. You got Lydia Maria Child. She wrote a book in 1834 called An Appeal for That Class of Americans Called Africans. It was deeply influenced by one of the greatest works ever written at that time by David Walker, Appeal to Colored Citizens of the World. She's a white sister. She is as vanilla as Doris Day in the 1830s, fundamental part of the Black freedom movement, right? Well, you see, those folk need to be lifted up, because what does that do? That exposes our humanity in terms of the choices we make.
Yeah, so I'll be talking about Lydia Maria Child. She was born in Medford, Mass., another author from the Massachusetts area.
Sweet.
And she wrote a book called Hobomok, which is sort of scandalous because it involves an interracial marriage between a colonial woman and a Native American, and they have a child. And then the Englishman, the woman originally loved, comes back, and the Native American gives up his son and walks west. So it's still problematic, but she was an early SJW, people might say, and she was rather important. So I talk about her, or at least her early life, in the next episode.
Dude had to give up the child?
Yeah, he's like, she still prays for you in her sleep, so I'm just gonna go head off. And he says, with the red men in the west. And that's the inevitable sort of like era. Cultural genocide myths were even among the liberals back then.
Great.
But she was an ally, and she got better over time. She wrote that when she was about 23. So
that's pretty good. There was not even people forget that the abolitionists, like a huge percentage of the abolitionists, probably the majority of the abolitionists, they weren't necessarily for black rights.
Yeah, they started off, a lot of them, let's get them into Liberia.
Right. We can send them away or do this and that.
Because clearly we can't, coexist with them.
These things take time. I guess. Quick break, fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501457. 238 56, 27, 1/2, 5/8, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance. Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we're back, ladies and gentlemen. We're back. We're gonna put a link up in the on the blog. I was on the in the Hills show today with Crystal Ball this morning with Crystal Ball and I can't remember his name, but he's a good guy too. He seemed very nice. I only know Crystal Ball's name because I knew her from MSNBC.
It's also easy to remember.
It's also easy to remember. So we'll put that link on the site, majority.fm. We'll put it in the podcast description as well. All right, let's just touch on this Ukraine phone call, because Thursday, like I said, the acting director of the National Intelligence will be in front of the House Intel Committee for a public hearing. They will ask him, who's the whistleblower? He will say, I can't tell you. They will say, are you prepared to hand over the complaint? Maybe. We're still looking at that question. That's what I would guess, right? They're not going to say no. They're going to say, we need more time to think about it.
And they're going to reference the Justice Department as well, and they're ruling on this.
Oh, did the OLC come out with something?
Not the OLC, but direction given by the Justice Department is that this is above board for McGuire to release the whistleblower's identity.
It's above board? What do you mean? It's not that he's not obligated to?
Yes.
Okay. And then supposedly this is when we're going to see that the Democrats. And here's what's sort of suspicious to me about the whole thing. Why I'm sorry. I don't trust Nancy Pelosi on this. We have been told time and time again, they're already starting it. Don't you understand? Nancy Pelosi is, this is like 14-dimension chess. We've been told, right? Impeachment proceedings are starting. Although then she went into a meeting, as reported by Politico the other day, and said, you guys are going too fast on this. Then she writes a Dear Colleague letter to all members on the whistleblower complaint. We're going to expect Joseph McGuire to turn over the whistleblower's full complaint to the committee. We also expect he will establish a path for the whistleblower to speak directly to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees as required by law. She notes that the IC's Inspector General, who is appointed by Trump, has determined the complaint is both of, quote, urgent concern and credible. And its disclosure relates to, this is a quote, to one of the most significant and important of the Director of National Intelligence responsibilities to the American people. She cites a federal statute which unequivocally states the DNI shall provide Congress this information. We must be sure the president and his administration are always conducting our national security and foreign policy in the best interest of the American people, not the president's personal or political interests. Feels like that ship may have already sailed. She closes, if the administration persists in blocking this whistleblower from disclosing to Congress a serious possible breach of constitutional duties by the president, they will be entering a grave new chapter of lawlessness, which will take us into, quote, a whole new stage of investigation. What is the whole new stage? I thought we were already there. Why? And if we're not there, why have we not been there? I mean, this is where she's basically conceding. I've been stepping on the brakes. And again, it's conditional. Look, it's enough that they haven't handed this over. It's enough that they've said to Congress multiple times over and over again, we're not going to provide you the information that you need for oversight, not just the Mueller investigation, everything. The EPA, the Bureau of Land Management, the USDA, what, all of it. Stuff that we don't even talk about because it's all been sat on by the Democrats. It's infuriating. And every day we just watch them attempt to spin this stuff and conflate it with other things. Let's start with clip number 2. We're going to play clip number 1 again, but we're going to play clip number 2 first. This is where Donald Trump is saying on Sunday, Trump, I don't know, he was trying to audition as an extra in the Chernobyl series, I guess, here. But he admits that he asked Ukrainian President Zelensky to look into Joe Biden. Very odd thing to ask in the context of but
it's a nice conversation.
Yeah, we had a lot of stuff. We've been spending a lot of time on the Biden case.
We had a great conversation. The conversation I had was largely congratulatory, was largely corruption, all of the corruption taking place, was largely the fact that we don't want our people, like Vice President Biden and his son, creating to the corruption already in the Ukraine. In Ukraine, Ukraine's got a lot of problems. The new president is saying that he's going to be able to rid the country of corruption, and I said that would be a great thing. We had a great conversation. We had a conversation on many things. In fact, I believe Ukraine put out a statement yesterday saying that we covered many different topics. It was a warm and friendly conversation. I backed Ukraine from the beginning.
Okay, so he admits that he talked about Biden, raised Biden up because of all the massive corruption that the Biden family has been involved in Ukraine, according to him. Right, that's been the when people talk about Ukrainian corruption, as opposed to talking about Biden's corruption, let's say, people always bring up Biden. I'm being facetious. Hunter Biden, I don't know why he was sitting on that board, but I can tell you, if that was the most corrupt thing about Ukraine, in terms of the way, they'd be doing all right. And Rudy Giuliani, also slowly losing his mind, is adamant that the president did not threaten to cut off aid to Ukraine. And by adamant, I mean maybe not totally adamant.
Did the president threaten to cut off aid to the Ukraine?
No, that was a false story.
100%.
Well, I can't tell you if it's 100%.
Because we know that the administration did delay U.S. aid to Ukraine.
The Wall Street Journal also fails in its false article today. It fails to point out on the headlines on Saturday in the Ukraine was the Ukrainian version of this story. Ukraine says no pressure.
Right. No pressure, no collusion, none of that. Remember, no pressure. So there you go. Almost a 100% did not threaten to cut off aid to Ukraine. I bring you back to the clip that we started with at the beginning of the show. This is Trump today, correct? Now, to be fair, it's a full 24 hours later. Sometimes I wonder if Trump just wants to make Rudy Giuliani look like an ass, because here he is admitting that indeed he did threaten to cut off. He gave an ultimatum. Listen carefully.
What did you give the Ukrainian president about Joe Biden and his son during your phone call?
Well, you're going to see, because what we are doing is we want honesty. And if we deal with a country, we want honesty. And I think with the new president, you're going to see much more honesty in the Ukraine. And that's what we're looking for. We're supporting a country. We want to make sure that country is honest. It's very important to talk about corruption. If you don't talk about corruption, why would you give money to a country that you think is corrupt? One of the reasons the new president...
That's it right there, folks. He couldn't help himself. And the reason is he's afraid that the transcript is going to come out. So he's trying to reinterpret the way it's going to sound to us. When he says, if you do not go after Biden, who is corrupt, we're not going to give you money.
Then I'll think you're corrupt.
And then I'll think you're corrupt.
And not nice.
And so he may have said something like, so you're going to go after Biden, right? If you want the money. And he probably said that about 8 times.
If it took 8 times, I assume that even the prime minister's like, yeah, you mean, we have protocols that we're going to follow, or something non-committal like that.
Or it could be one of those situations where Trump keeps saying it and the prime minister just says something different. Like, you're going to go after Biden, right? If you want the money. And the prime minister says, how's Melania? She's wonderful. But you're going to go after Biden, right? If you want the money. Tell me something about your club in Miami. Can anybody join? But you're going to go after Biden, right? Because he's corrupt. If you want the money.
What was Trump quoted as saying to Comey? Like, I hope we can see this through, or see past this.
Right. There's always like this type of stuff. But I think they seem to be a little bit nervous about this, but who knows? Certainly Rudy Giuliani's doing the old, I guarantee it, 100%. Well, not 100%. But the point remains, and here's Mehdi Hassan talking about this. The point remains, everything that Donald Trump is doing, it goes from being on Donald Trump, and I've said this for a week. I finally tweeted it out. Somebody was like, well, it's about time you tweeted it, because you said it a day and after. I'm going to say it every day now. The founders contemplated someone like Donald Trump, which is why they put impeachment in there. But they also assumed that there'd be someone different from Nancy Pelosi who would actually attempt to hold the president to account with the tools that they have provided. And when you do not do that, you own it. And until Nancy Pelosi gets her caucus to vote for impeachment, until that time, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans will not own it. When she does, they will then own it. And they may say, we don't care. It's BS. But at least then it's on them. And that's what you start to run against them. Donald Trump, there was a poll out today, NBC poll. See if we can pull this here. I'll send you it's an NBC News poll. And it basically shows how much, what policies Democratic voters want, and what policies, here it is. It's an NBC News poll and Wall Street Journal. A record share of voters dislike Trump personally. They also sort of don't like his policies. Gives a breakdown of what policies people like. We'll put this up. There's a nice graph that shows you the difference between Democratic primary voters and all registered voters. Dreamers staying in the United States, 89% versus 67% across the board. Medicare buy-in, 78% for those under 65. Again, 67%. There's a lot of, keep going down a little more. You'll see it right here. There's a lot of there's a lot of very progressive policies. You get down to Medicare for all. 63% of Democrats like it, 41% of American public, but it says eliminating all private insurance. I think if you were to put making private insurance obsolete there, it might change those numbers. But I would also add that building a wall gets around 43%, and Donald Trump seemed to do pretty well running on that. So, but the other thing that came out of this is essentially the Democrats want to make this a referendum on Trump. And Trump wants to make it a choice between two bad options, which is basically what we've been saying here for a long time. Trump is going to try and depress the vote by making the alternative seem tainted as well. And so the people go, screw it. The Democrats have one perfect way to nationalize every single House election, every single Senate election in the country. And they can do it and nationalize it by making it about Donald Trump. They can make every single election about Donald Trump, whether you're running for Congress in East Bum Place in Montana or in, downtown Houston or upstate New York. It doesn't matter. And that is to push impeachment and make every single one of them either vote on it or make a statement about it. And then it all becomes about Trump. And Trump is the most disliked president that we have had in decades and decades and decades. And the presidential elections will run that's a different calculus. Can't just run against Trump because you have to make sure that you are building a force field around yourself, essentially, as the presidential candidate. But if you're in Congress and you're in Senate, you can run against Trump. And you can make the Republicans own it if you vote to impeach in the House. Here's Mehdi Hassan making a point about the Democrats just simply not doing their job.
I mean, you have to admire the brazenness of the hypocrisy when it comes to Donald Trump's attacks on his opponents. For this president of all presidents to attack the child of a rival? I mean, should we talk about Ivanka Trump and her Chinese trademarks? And should we talk about Don Jr. and Eric and the Trump organization and the non-existent Chinese wall between them and the guy in the Oval Office? I mean, it's the irony beyond irony, but the Republicans are good at this stuff. They're shameless, they're brazen, they take advantage of the whole media both sidesism, and therefore they're going to continue doing this. And I think Trump's going to carry on doing this stuff because, Joy, one thing that's missing from your timeline that you showed at the start, for me, a very crucial date, July 25th is the day he made the call to the Ukrainian president, allegedly 8 times pressured him to investigate Biden's son. What happened on July 24th? The day before, Robert Mueller testifies in Congress saying this president has not been exonerated. This president could still be indicted after he leaves office. And what happens? Nothing. No change in the Democratic leadership's position on impeachment. So if you're Donald Trump and you see, wait a minute, I can get away with 2016, why wouldn't you do it again in 2020?
Yeah, there it is. He basically said, I guess what I did was legal. I might as well do it again. It worked so well the first time.
5 seconds.
There are implications. I mean, aside from what you leave on the table in terms of the politics, if you do not pursue impeachment, there's also implications that you're basically saying to the guy, There's nothing you can do that will get you impeached. Nothing. Nothing.
I know what to do with that information.
Holy cow. This is a total open door policy. They sent out Steve Mnuchin. This guy should be in prison. This guy should be just getting out of prison, it seems to me, for what he did in the foreclosure crisis. He's not, largely because Kamala Harris ignored recommendations from people in her office. Maybe there was nothing there. This whole thing is like, this whole administration in many respects is like that part with Saving Private Ryan, which I did not like, frankly. But the idea that like they should have killed that German soldier because he came back and shot one of the, I can't remember who it was. It was not, I didn't particularly like that movie. I thought the Thin Red Line was a lot better. Is that what it was? Malick had a movie out at the same time as Saving Private Ryan. Doesn't matter. But the point is that Steve Mnuchin, when you do not hold these people to account at the time that they commit a crime or a civil violation, a lot of times these guys come back. They don't just go like, oh, I got away with one. I'm going to go home and count my money. It's, I am completely untouchable. That means I can go forward and take more. I can steal more. And that's why we have Steve Mnuchin as the Treasury Secretary out there trying to argue that, it's not a lot of money to us. Why would it make a difference to Ukraine?
Do you know why the aid was delayed, and did it have a connection to the Ukrainian president's decision not to work with Rudy Giuliani?
Well, that I can tell you, that there was no connection. I have been involved with Secretary Pompeo and others on the national security team on the issue of the aid.
How do you know? How do you know for sure? I know you can. Do you know 100%?
Well, what I know is I've been in discussions when we discussed that, and that issue never came up.
During your meetings?
Absolutely.
With the president. And can you explain how all of a sudden when the aid got released, more money showed up? Where did that money come from? There was $250 million, and they got an additional, I think, $140 million that they didn't expect. Where did that, do you have any idea where that
Surprise.
Came from? Well, it was appropriated money that came through the State Department.
So they didn't know they were getting this money. Is there any indication why they got the money when they did?
I'm not sure it's correct for you to say they didn't know they got the money.
The president said he was surprised to get it. The president of Ukraine said he was surprised to get an additional $140 million. He said it was a pleasant surprise, but that he was surprised.
I think he was referring to his expectations as opposed to necessarily a surprise. But you're getting into details. Again, these are foreign policy issues. They've been discussed at the National Security Council at the principals level. These were not connected issues.
But do you have any problem with Congress looking into any of this?
What I have a problem with is Congress asking for a transcript between world leaders. I think that those are confidential discussions, and that's a difficult precedent.
Okay, but does the president have any? He says he said nothing inappropriate, so why not release a transcript?
Because, again, I think that these are confidential discussions between world leaders, and world leaders expect that they're going to be kept confidential. It has nothing to do with this call per se.
Okay.
It's just the precedent that they're concerned about.
I love precedents.
I'm concerned about the precedents, folks.
So Steve Mnuchin saying with 100% assuredness that when Donald Trump came in and said they told me to delay the money, he didn't say it's because they won't give me dirt on Biden.
See, no collusion. Even
no
Sam
collusion.
Says so.
Never said it.
Even
Never
Sam
said it.
says.
Never said it. Never said it's because of what they're doing with Biden. Never said it. I never said it.
Which, I mean, there's a chance he even was that explicit about it.
There is a slight chance, but it's probably more like we're not giving money to...
They're not playing ball.
They're not playing ball. They're not on our team. They're not good people. They're bad people.
They're not nice.
I mean, that would have been the question for Chuck Todd to ask, right? Steve Mnuchin? Like, okay, That never came up, the Biden thing. Why did you delay it? Like, what were the reasons? What were the geopolitical reasons that you delayed it and then ended up coming back with 50% more money than they had anticipated?
I think he answered that when he said it came through the State Department.
Well, it came through the State Department. Yeah, indeed. But what was the reasoning? That would be the question that I would ask. Like, what's the reasoning? You say it's not because of Joe Biden. Okay. So when he came in there, what reason did he give you? I don't like their flag. I don't like the colors in the flag. We need a better press and opposition party.
Well, wasn't he saying they weren't going to give it to him because of their history of corruption? And they just weren't sure that he was corrupt? Or if he wouldn't be corrupt until he had the conversation?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's what it was. In fact, he was so convincing that he was not corrupt. We gave him a 50% tip. He wanted $240 million. We gave him like $380. He just came off as like a really not corrupt guy.
If I get an extra like $140 million, I would be gushing about that phone call too. It was a nice phone call.
Yeah, nice. I wonder what that money was for.
That is a very Trump way of doing diplomatic endeavors, where you're like, man, this guy was such a great server at the restaurant at Cipriani's. I just gave him a 50% tip.
There you go.
He's a good guy.
Loose lips, right? Sometimes you have so much extra money, you can't talk. Greta Thunberg was at the United Nations. And it was nice. She crapped all over these people on some level. And I think more of this is necessary.
This is like Anand Girdardis at Davos, but
right,
better.
How old is she?
16, I think.
It's nuts. I like how everybody laughs at first. And then she just like drives a stake through their hearts, essentially.
My message is that we'll be watching you.
Oh, so cute. Cute little girl. So cute.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe.
She came back. Here's another segment from that same talk.
With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
I don't know how you can go in front of those people and do better than that in terms of inspiring them. I don't know what it will take to get societies to respond to this type of thing. I really don't know. But at the very least, history is going to look back and say, like, just about every possible means in which to communicate this to the world was employed. It's a question of whether politicians and people, just broadly speaking, answered the call. Of course, on one hand, where you have this 16-year-old young woman, Greta Thunberg, who is addressing the United Nations and the world in a way that you would imagine would inspire people and scare people and shame them. There's also a whole cohort of people in the world who not only can't get motivated to do something about it, actively profit on the idea that it's all a hoax. I don't know how dark your soul has to be one of the 4 people sitting on this couch this morning. It's Fox and Friends. Every day we laugh at Steve Doocy and Brian Kilmeade about how stupid they are, and then sort of get amazed at how stupid Ainsley Earhart is. This guy, Mark Morano, who's the executive editor of ClimateDepot.com, which, of course, is literally set up and financed to deny reality. Now, maybe the guy's really, really stupid. Or maybe he's just incredibly craven. But he's so stupid that it reaches a level of cravenness. Here he is, talking about how dangerous Greta Thunberg is because of what she's doing to the children.
Group did those interviews. What is it about her that has interested so many young people?
Well, she sells fear. Greta Thunberg started in Sweden every Friday outside the Swedish parliament, and it spread to skip school in order to have a future. In other words, she's actually said, and she's addressed the EU, the United States Congress, testified that why should kids go to school if they have a future that will be no more unless government passes laws like the Green New Deal, more UN treaties, etc. So this message of fear...
And is it working in Sweden?
It worked in Sweden, it's working in Europe, and now it's come to the U.S. The message of fear sells. There's reports now in Europe where kids are getting anti-anxiety medication. They believe they're going to die. She is the Greta effect. She's causing and instilling fear in millions of kids around the world and actually has them believing that government can legislate our climate. In other words, if we pass the Green New Deal in America, these kids can all go back to school.
You know, like when I watch a clip like this, I spend the entire time, not just during the clip, but after the clip, in anticipation of playing the clip on the show, thinking, should I really like address this on like an argumentative terms? Like, should I try and refute the idea that kids all around the world are taking anti-anxiety medication because of Greta Thunberg? Should I try and just pick apart this guy from Climate Depot, his argument that she is just like trying to exploit fear, I guess presumably so she doesn't have to go to school? Like this tremendous amount of effort to play hooky that she's engaged in? Or is it more interesting and valuable just to go like, what? how just empty and decrepit do you have to be inside of you? Like, I feel like if we were to cut that guy open, it would just be like dust inside.
Do you want some biographical information?
I was going to say.
So he previously was the environmental communications director for guess which senator?
James Inhofe.
Nailed it. And climatedepot.com is a website for the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, which has taken Exxon and Scafie money.
There you go.
Better than that, top donors are Donors Trust from Dark Money with over $8 million in donations. Charles G. Koch Foundation, Donors Capital Fund, and a bunch of Charles Koch Institute. So we're hitting
like
all the boxes.
There's so many things that you could do for money if you had absolutely no scruples or morals whatsoever. And this one still seems like it would be like at the bottom of that list. Like everything else on that list. Can I be in charge of putting the lead in the candy? Because that feels a little bit, at least, I don't have to show my face.
Yeah.
If it pays well. To go out there and sell this stuff on television, is he like an orphan? Did he grow up with knowing no human beings? Was he raised in the woods and he doesn't have any contact with any human beings and therefore he doesn't feel any shame whatsoever? That's the thing. Like I don't even know what to argue with this guy. The idea that she's selling fear. How is she profiting off of this? What is she selling? It's stunning. It really is stunning.
Our friend Mark also worked for Rush Limbaugh in the 90s.
I mean, it all makes it much more clear. I mean, it's been very profitable.
Wow. He has been going in about Greta Thunberg's autism. He apparently called her an autistic prophet. So that's the kind of scumbag we're dealing with here.
There you go.
He's raising the bar. Wow.
Yeah.
And a George Mason University graduate, we should point out.
Oh. Is he going on tour with Dave Rubin? Didn't Rubin get some funding from George Mason's like Liberty Project or something like that?
Oh, yeah, it's all Koch money over there.
All right. Lastly, Greta Thunberg was in front of Congress. They brought in some other kid to be the anti-Greta. And he was okay, just sort of defended, like, we don't want to ruin our way of life to protect our way of life.
The 15-year-old that is primarily concerned about the economy.
Right, exactly. I'm super worried about where the market's going to be in 25 years because So here is Garrett Graves. He is a congressman from Louisiana. Think he gets a lot of oil money? I would bet. A lot of refineries down there. So here's Garrett Graves trying to both be sort of like jocular. He realizes he's dealing with a teenage girl, young woman. So he doesn't want to look like too much of a jerk. But he also gets it handed to him on a platter, I should say, or he is returned on a platter by Thunberg. Here he is trying to make her understand, like, I have an analogy for you that she basically says, your analogy is wrong. Here's the right one.
Ms. Thunberg, let me ask you a question. If you're sailing across the ocean and you're picking up trash along the way, and for every one piece of trash that you pick up, there's a boat right next to you dumping out 5 pieces. How would that make you feel?
First of all, we were going so fast, there wasn't enough to pick up any trash.
All right, well, if you were a slow sailor like me, how would that make you feel?
Well, first of all, if you use that logic, then I am also dumping a lot of trash in the ocean. And then I would I would stop dumping my trash in the ocean and tell the other boat to stop dumping their trash in the ocean as well.
And that's the important point here. I think that what we need to be doing is we need to be focusing on the countries that are dumping trash in the ocean. Of course, that's a metaphor.
Right.
The fact that China
it's a metaphor.
is,
I think she answered your metaphor, and she said, well, if your metaphor is to be accurate, we're both dumping trash in the ocean. There is no boat that is sailing across the ocean just picking up trash. There is no country in the world that has a net negative carbon footprint. And in fact, when we talk about our boat, in his metaphor, we're dumping trash too. China may be dumping more trash than we are. But as she says, I would stop dumping trash in the ocean, and then I would ask them to stop dumping trash too.
And then I would share anti-trash dumping technologies with the other boats.
Indeed. He goes on to, he just goes on to claim that it's basically all China's fault, and we're not going to, it doesn't do anything if we do anything. So about 5 or 6 minutes later, she addresses him again. Not necessarily by name, but addresses this stupid analogy of his. By saying, we have it? Addresses this stupid analogy, which is incorrect. And she immediately just picks it out. Like, oh, I see what your analogy is. That's very clever. Except for it does not correspond to the real world. There are no boats that are just picking up trash. There are boats that are dumping less trash and trying to dump less trash and should be dumping no trash. And then other boats to whom we should say, do the same as we're doing. So later in that same hearing, she gets a little bit more explicit because he makes it a little more tangible for Garrett Graves.
Just look at the U.S., they say. So just so you know, that is being used against the U.S.
Go back. She's going to make the point here that, like, you can say that compared to China, the U.S. is not dumping a lot of trash in the ocean, as it were. But I got some bad news for you. There's other countries, not just the U.S.
I think I don't need to add anything, but just another perspective. I am from Sweden. It's a small country. And there it is the same argument. Why should we do anything? Just look at the U.S., they say. So just so you know, that is being used against you as well.
Yeah.
She's looking out for him.
Right. Why should we do anything? Because China's dumping more than us. And she says, well, I got news for you. In Sweden, we say the same thing. Why should we do anything? Because the U.S. is dumping more trash.
I've been exposed to this elementary argument before.
Yes. This is, I mean, it's fun to watch a 16-year-old run circles around these Congress people because she just doesn't have the same sort of like notion of like, oh, am I supposed to be polite enough to not point out how stupid they are? It really is amazing. Meanwhile, let's just turn to 2020. We got a couple of clips. Here is this was at the Robert Kuttner brought up the point that there is a nascent movement among young black people to tell their parents essentially, like, look, Joe Biden isn't necessarily the best choice. And I think if you are in any way mystified, and it is the case that Bernie Sanders has a very diverse base of support. Racially diverse, socially diverse, economically, I mean, it's diverse, but you know, it is true that Elizabeth Warren dominates in terms of the audience for progressive ideals. She dominates in the more educated, wealthier folks, which is not to say that it's billionaires and millionaires type of thing, but Bernie Sanders has a broader coalition of working class people. Now, Nate Silver points out that it's not impressive because his numbers are not as big as they were during the 2016 election, and that the only reason why he has diverse numbers is because there are less numbers of white people who are following him. So he attained diversity by losing white voters relative to where he was in 2016. Now, this is a unique way of measuring diversity, because in some respects, you could make that argument about the Democratic Party. The only reason why the Democratic Party looks so diverse is because less than 50% of white people vote for them. But if all white people voted for Democrats too, there'd be less representation of black people in their coalition, percentage-wise. It's a very odd perspective to take. I think it's like technically accurate, but it's a very odd perspective to take. So if you are confused as to why Bernie Sanders would have a diverse following and a strong following of young black activists in particular, but young people more broadly speaking. This clip of Keeanga Yamada Taylor at the Afro-Socialist DSA event is, I think, sort of on point.
Those of us who stand with Bernie and see ourselves as part of the political resistance in this country do so out of hope and possibility, not bitterness and despair. It is hope. It is the possibility of a better life. It is the possibility of a better world. We are not called to this movement based on the things that we don't want or based on the people that we don't want to vote for. For the first time in any of our lifetimes, we have a candidate for whom we can proudly vote for who has an actual chance to win. We have an opportunity to vote for the things that we want and not just vote against the things that we don't want. Universal health care, universal access to college, housing for all, an actual strategy to confront the climate crisis, jobs with living wages and union protections. And this is precisely why this campaign, despite the slights and derision, has attracted a broad audience of ordinary black youth and young black workers. They are attracted to the campaign for the simple reason that capitalism has failed the vast majority of poor and working class African Americans. Many of us have come to the realization that capitalism and its so-called colorblind market economy has never worked for us. It didn't work when we were bought and sold on the market. It hasn't worked when we have been either locked out or marginalized within the job market. It has not worked when we have been locked out or marginalized within the housing market. In fact, there is no golden age of American capitalism that we can point to and say, that's when African Americans benefited from this system. So when Sanders says the name of the system and marks capitalism at the root as the root of our hardship, at the root of our despair, at the root of our indebtedness, at the root of our dispossession, then he is speaking to us. And of course, he is talking to everyone who suffers from the oppression and exploitation at the heart of capitalism.
I mean, it is pretty hard to argue with that construction. I think you could argue that slavery was, I don't know, could you argue that it was pre-capitalist? Not really. No, I mean, it was, you're obviously exploiting labor here.
That exploitation sort of, like some people say, it sort of was the central exploitation to launching capitalism,
right, in this country.
Properly known, yeah.
It's very hard to imagine I don't think you could have slavery in the context of a socialist society. Could you, on some level? I mean, I suppose you could have an authoritarian if you had an authoritarian, but a genuinely socialist society. Now, part of the problem is that it's hard to achieve. But it's a very hard argument to refute. I mean, you could say, like, well, this time we're going to get it right with capitalism.
Well, that's where T.I. jumped on Candace Owens.
Exactly. Name an era that you can go back to Make America Great Again for black people. But there it is. I've turned on the IM machine. People can IM me. I don't think we're going to have time for calls today. I don't want to have people hanging on there. Maybe we'll take one call. I'll call into the system, but we're going to take some IMs. Oh, hot in here today. It's unseasonably warm in New York City. Just do this here. Take some IMs. Oh, boy. This is a little tricky. Jordan Peterson, pharmacist. Do you have any questions today about your prescription? I do have to point out there are 12 interaction notices on this medication, but the first is that under no circumstances while taking this medicine should you ever consume apple cider. Doing so can lead to overwhelming feelings of impending doom and possible death. Pajama Boy, Dave Rubin doesn't do coke no more, he just blazes. Gabe, formerly from Chicago. I've been following the Israeli election. It's such a mess. I have been trying to. If Lieberman won't back Netanyahu or Gantz, then neither will be able to create a 61-seat coalition. Gantz will still have more seats, but that doesn't mean that he can create a government. Also, I'm not sure if he needs Balad to back him or not. Parliamentary politics is confusing. It's unclear. I've seen like 3 or 4 different sort of like potential scenarios. They're wheeling and dealing and they're seeing, but it's like there's a lot of people like, I won't sit with this person and I won't sit with that person. It's like a Thanksgiving with like multiple divorces and people don't want to sit next to each other. Waterboat from Kashmir. Honestly, Kashmiris don't expect help from Trump, but we hope that the world, meaning people, are informed and consistently bring up repression, injustice, and atrocities in Kashmir. In short, we hope for solidarity. This would be enough to put eternal pressure on India and stave off an armed insurgents, which is becoming more and more likely as news coverage disappears and Kashmiris lose hope in unarmed resistance. Send us any type of links or anything where we could get more information coming out. Dolink, you can watch UN TV online 24/7. Watch today's climate summit. Google it for the website. Attorney Andrew, questions for the group and a comment. When on the Dave Roberts interview, he said that the times call for someone who can make deals and work behind the scenes, and he sees Warren as that person. What evidence supports that sentiment? To me, it seems based entirely on a reputation as a wonk and a liberal fetishization with balance and assumed viability, not on a history of political acumen. Warren could not even make the Obama administration put her in charge of the agency she envisioned and created, the CFPB. All this to say Warren has has to have a movement to get anything done.
I would cite the WFP endorsement, unironically.
I think that's absolutely right. I think there was a lot of political machinations involved there. I think the agency she envisioned and created, you've answered your own question. She created an agency that was self-sustaining. It was the first agency of its kind in an extended period of time. I don't know if there was any, that itself was a significant feat. The way that she moved, the way that she ended up becoming senator after, I think there's a lot of, for someone to be able to go into that, I can tell you that prior to this election, to the extent that anybody I know has reported on her, that is the one thing that they would say, is that she knows how to work and to deal with that inside game. Now, you could argue that that's not what we need now, or that it's a bad skill set to have. I agree with you that
to me,
that agency. He's asking, what's that agency doing now? A lot less worse stuff than the EPA. Let's put it that way. They've shut it down, but they haven't been able to in any way materially pull it apart because of the way that it was structured. They haven't been able to reverse the way that it gets its funding. It's going to be one of the agencies that it's going to be able to sort of ramp back up pretty quickly. Everything is under assault under the Trump administration. But it was a lot more immune to this than the other standard agencies. And I mean, when was the last time we saw a full-blown agency like this created? It's not easy. I just think that there's a lot of things to critique Warren on, but I think that one is the weakest argument. Now, I think there's a very good argument that she needs a movement behind her to support what she's doing. And I don't know why. If I was her and I was elected president, or if I was me and I was elected president, I would make sure that I would keep Bernie close. Because personally, I asked Bernie, what are you going to do with this if you don't win? He's not going to stop. I don't think her policy set, I don't think they go as far as Bernie in some instances. But they're not inconsistent with what he wants. I would imagine that an outside movement is going to push Warren, and I would imagine she's going to be largely happy to have it. I mean, I may be wrong, but I mean, that would be my answer to that question.
That is what I always read. When people say Warren has a movement, I think what they're really saying is she'll be able to use Bernie's.
And I would be shocked if that hasn't occurred to Bernie as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I asked him outright. That was the one relevant question I felt like I had. It's like, how, and his response was as emphatic as anything else he said. Calling from a 716 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 716. We have him? Let's try it again here. Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Maybe it's my problem. Try this one more time.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Please use no speakerphone and have your one comment or question ready. Listen for Sam to call out your area code. Sam will be with you shortly.
So we gotta work on this. It's not showing up. The interface is not coming up here. Here we go. All right, let's try this one more time. See if I can find that person who we dumped. Calling from a 347 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Ali from Astoria.
Ali, what's going on? How are you? What's on your mind?
Nothing much. I just wanted to say that you guys have been killing it. Last week with the focus on Nancy Pelosi and the Lewandowski hearings, which was ridiculously bad. I was shocked by how badly the Democrats did at just asking questions. It was just saved by that one staff attorney.
Well, yeah. But that's why you have a staff attorney, because I think they realize we're not good at this. And I give people points for knowing their limitations. Next time they should put that guy up front, I think.
Well, I mean, there's a reason behind it. They don't about what's going to happen with the hearing itself. They just want sound bites that they can bring back their own districts. I mean, that's what I'm thinking, anyways.
It's possible, but that is a great argument as to why there should be more of these hearings, because they all think that it's going to help them get elected. And so have the staff attorney in there. I mean, look, it's hard to ask questions. I mean, if you really break down the way that staff attorney kept going after him, this is a guy who was very practiced at cross-examining witnesses, and that makes a big difference. I mean, it's a skill. That's why he does what he does, and they do what they do.
I suppose. I mean, it just made me think about what happened with North Carolina Democrats voting for Joe.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Virginia with the House. Sorry. It just makes me think about what happened in the North Carolina Dems voting for their own gerrymandering, Republican gerrymandering. The Democratic Party seems to be focused on individuals rather than the party as a whole.
Look, I think that is a problem in certain situations. But I mean, have you ever watched the Republicans ask questions? I mean, honestly, yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you don't need to be a genius to get into Congress. There's a reason why on day one, AOC gets in there and she is asking better questions than 90% of the Democrats on these caucuses, is because on these committees, it's just, they're not suited to this. And someone who's very smart, who's willing to do the homework and go in, can do well. 5 minutes per person is still like a structural obstacle to achieving it. So I mean, I agree with you in the North Carolina situation. I don't think it's some function of like selfishness. I think this is a competence question. And so, if it was selfishness, they wouldn't have voted to give that guy a half hour. They would say, well, we all want 6 minutes instead of 5. But I appreciate the call.
Well, I mean,
fraud save America. Roses are red. The right is a mess. But Pelosi sucks peanuts at four-dimensional checkers. Philadelphia girlfriend. How come no one ever mentions that Ben Carson is clearly a drunk? Is that true?
I've never seen clear evidence of that. I think there might be other stuff going on. But.
Vic Mulvaney. We're all talking like Trump will leave office when he loses in 2020. What are the odds of that? I don't know. You got to ask Bill Barr.
Also, it's not like we've we usually turn the page on this sort of thing, so it's not like he has anything to worry about. I mean, maybe he does, but I don't know.
Eric Weinstein's brain. What's the opposite of recovery mode? Firing on all cylinders up here, developing new high-level important ideas to discuss exclusively with fellow geniuses. Hollow the Where vegan. Sam, why are you so reluctant to promote veganism being a priority in regards to environmental issues? If we can't take people's trucks and their bacon, we might as well let them keep their assault weapons. Well, veganism isn't just necessarily a function of trucks. I think factory farming is a real problem. I'm not 100% convinced that all the answers are going to be solved by veganism, to be honest with you. And since it's something that we cannot mandate, and there's certainly, I mean, if we reach a couple 100,000 people, a month on this show, let's say, them all going vegan is not going to necessarily do it. Yeah. I think that's just I think we've talked about the role of veganism in the context of climate change. I know there's supposedly some controversy about it, but I haven't looked into that. But nevertheless, that's why. The priority in terms of environmental issues is having governmental action. I think there's a very strong argument that what we need to do is not subsidize corn so much and soybeans and factory farming, big ag. That way the price of meat is passed on to society, and we start to regulate our behavior in accordance to that. And I'm sensitive to the fact that there's some class issues in terms of that. But I also think that, frankly, we can also promote other vegan options at the higher end of the income spectrum. I don't know. I would be interested to see like where are most vegans in terms of class.
Yeah.
But like I said the other day, I had one of those Impossible burgers, and I can't imagine. And I had one at a barbecue too. Maybe it was Beyond Meat at a barbecue and an Impossible burger at a restaurant. I'm never going to eat another burger again. Never going to actively choose. I'm not. The taste. If I didn't know, I would have said this is a good tasting burger.
Damn.
And the texture is spot on, and it's like, why bother? At that point, like, why bother? I don't know that it's actually even healthier for you, those things.
Is it very sodium heavy?
I think they're, but, you know, if I can actually do something positive that doesn't take much effort, why wouldn't you do it? That's like, that should be like the bottom line. Mueller, she wrote, Sam, have you mentioned George Takei's new graphic novel titled They Called Us Enemy? It's good, easy to digest summary of the Japanese internment and draws clear parallels to things happening today. A good teaching tool for our youth. As soon as you said that, I was like, I got to get that from Mila. Our house is on fire. Do you have friends who don't believe in the climate crisis? If so, how do you maintain that relationship? I want to cut them off because they're convincing them is a lost cause. They fall into the insane column sold on Fox News propaganda. To be honest with you, I don't think I do. I mean, I run into a lot of people like, I've checked out of politics. It just seems so stupid. Right. And then I just lose it. And then I'm just like, yeah. And this is the way I start off with that. Like, oh yeah, no, I get that. Totally. I totally get that. And then I'm like, yeah, because I can. And then like within 5 minutes, I'm yelling at them. Like I try, like every fiber in my body is going like, you know, just be cool. Don't be a jerk. Try not to be so, such a pederast about this. And then like 4.5 minutes into it, I find that I'm just like yelling. This happened to me on 2 separate occasions over the past 4 days.
Since working here, I've found myself in situations like that where I'm like, oh no,
I've turned
acting like Sam.
Right. Yeah. Hey, now, I will say this, like, that's why it was so much worse during the Bush years, because that was every single interaction with people. Now, at least, you know, in certain circles, like everybody agrees, yeah, it's a crap show and we have to stay involved and we have to, but back in the day. Brock from VA. The myth that mass shootings are being driven by SSRIs and antidepressants comes from an old article by a group called CCHR, which was started and is run by the Church of Scientology. Scientology is hostile to the entire field of psychology, and gun nuts ran with their theory during the Obama presidency after Sandy Hook to push back against gun law talks. I've heard both, right? I don't know. I don't know. Didn't someone come on the show recently say something to that effect?
Yeah, I think so. I that was ringing in my head too. I can't remember.
I don't know if someone called in.
Guns. I do think someone called in about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
A square. I don't know, and I don't know how you would find that information. I don't know how that would be legal for us to know. Because even after death, right? I mean, it's like you can't necessarily that. I don't know. A square. Sam already dreading an SNL skit on Biden-Ukraine issue and also a skit on that brave young woman addressing power. Dave from Chicago. Dinesh D'Souza has a seriously garbage tweet about Greta. I saw that. Did you see that one?
Yeah.
You know what? Like, I was gonna go after him, and I was like, this guy's just trolling. No, like he's just looking too much. There's no argument there. Michael Bennet is still in the 2020 race. He thinks that he is like, General Sherman, I think. Right? Wasn't it like Sherman's March?
The March to the Sea?
Right?
After winning this
I wish
war
he was,
in the South?
I don't quite think he's bringing that energy to this. It's more like, I don't know. What's living off the land?
That's more like Manson.
But didn't Sherman at one point, like they had like supply line problems, and so that they had to. It's unclear. I don't know enough about the military history of the Civil War yet. Here's Michael Bennet. He's got his 25 people with signs. I presume he's in Iowa. That's where everybody's been. He's still in the race, folks. Cory Booker says he's going to have to get out if he doesn't raise $8 to $10 million. I think he's going to make it. At least in the short run. Or maybe he needs $2 or $3 million in 8 to 10 days.
It'd be interesting to see that ultimatum and then get a register of all the call logs that Cory's making.
Right. But here's Michael Bennet taking the campaign by storm. And as he says, it sounds like he's eating bugs.
To continue to go forward. And what does your campaign look like over these next 4 or 5 months?
We're living off the land, and my old friend John McCain was able to do that when he was running, when he was given up for dead in the polls. And I think we're going to keep pushing here. We're going to keep going. I'm on TV here in Iowa. All day long I've been meeting people who's been watching the ads, and they feel good about it, and I feel good about it. So we'll see what happens.
So John McCain in 2008 was basically, his campaign had virtually no money. His people had left him. And then they realized, like, we have no opportunity to win here. We need someone who is the least Republican, at least in terms of image, of anybody in the Republican Party. Because the Republican Party in 2007 was dirt. And so they got John McCain, and he came out of the ashes. I do not think it is the exact same situation for Michael Bennet. It may be closer to Sherman's March, though.
Even if it was, why is that the second thing you're talking about? Like John McCain? Who is this appealing to?
Well, that's the thing, is he's so inside baseball that he doesn't even realize, like, hey, man, we're giving you an opportunity to speak to voters, and all you're doing is talking to donors right now. All he's doing is talking to donors. He is not arguing. The American public doesn't know what the hell he's saying. The Democratic primary voter doesn't go like, oh, he's like John McCain? Well, in that case, I'm going to support him. He is trying to make the argument to the establishment of the party, hey, you can give me money. I'm not dead yet. But I have some bad news for Michael Bennet. He's dead. All right, a couple more IMs. Take one more phone call. That's it. 561. Calling from a 561 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh my God. Hi, this is Alexa. I'm calling from Jersey, but I've been following you and other independent progressive media for a while, like TYT and David Pakman, and I think what you guys do is great. But as a person of color, I find it kind of difficult to find progressive independent media from the perspective of people of color, and especially queer people of color. So I want to know what your thoughts on that are, and if you know any independent progressive individuals as people of color.
I agree. I agree. I look for it all the time. Honestly, like everybody here is sort of chuckling because that is, we're always looking for folks like that. Ben Dixon has a show He's straight. He's male. I don't know. Now, to be fair, I don't spend a lot of time consuming media. I know Pac-Man. I mean, I know him personally. I can't say that I watch his show very much at all. Same with Kalinsky, even with TYT. I don't know. There used to be a network, I guess, called TWIB. And Elon, his name escaped me. I'm old right now. He had a network that had a couple of shows, but yeah, it's a problem. It's a real problem. And I can tell you, Alexa, that I look for this because I'm aware of this show's lack of diversity. And so I'm always on the lookout.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why, it's not like there isn't stuff to be said. I don't know why that is. You can do a show like this one from your desk. And it's not going to look as good as this, but this did not look as good as it. I mean, you go back and look at what this show looked like 8-9 years ago, and I was already, coming from, radio. I'm just in front of a white wall with a tiny computer printout, a printer printout of the Majority Report logo, which, my friend Dorsey made.
Mm-hmm. I have another quick question. Since I asked this because I'm actually thinking of doing my own YouTube channel to help incentivize people my age to be into social politics and be socially politically aware. But my biggest question is, you produce content every single day. You're on at 12 p.m. Eastern every day. And I'm wondering, how do you just start? Because obviously it's a one-man job I'm doing right now, so I'm not going to be doing this every day like you are. But I really want to produce content to make it digestible for people my age, and I just don't know where to start, I guess.
Send me an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com.
Okay, thank you so much. Wow, I'm actually really surprised that you answered my call, and I've been waiting, and it's really great to hear that you answer your callers, especially I've called other shows, and I've been really degraded since I'm only 19, but I really appreciate your honesty, especially in even viewing your own crew with the lack of diversity, because I really am trying to find this to help all my friends and people that I talk to who are people of color be into progressive independent media.
Yeah, to a large extent, to be honest with you, a big part of my personal project is to try and grow more of this type of media. And it's hard. We don't have, huge resources to do it. I try and do it to the extent that we can, but yes, I want to say, first of all, you should email us at majorityreporters@gmail.com and happy to talk to you about this stuff and more. But I would just say to anybody out there too, if you know of shows that you think that we should be aware of and we can help promote in some fashion, email us. There are some shows that I think are not good, not just in terms of I'm not so worried about sort of the production style or the performance, but just in terms of the messaging, I don't think is good, and I won't necessarily promote those. But I'm pretty open, and any way we can help people, we will do it. So you send us an email, but other people, feel free, majorityreporters@gmail.com. If you think there's shows I should check out, by all means, please.
Yeah, at me at Twitter too. And I would just say to anybody generally.
Thanks, Alexa.
On the production side of stuff.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, just start doing stuff because you're not going to get the production down to your satisfaction until you've done it for a year probably.
I broadly speaking, even outside of the political realm, just in any type of project, any type of business, I have come to the conclusion that doing it is better than doing it right. You can do it in the world that we live in now. you know, I'm pretty conservative with this stuff. Not ideologically, but in terms of like how quickly I'll grow. I had a PowerPoint presentation on how to go out and raise money for this. And I was just very reluctant. For whatever my own psychological issues, I don't feel comfortable doing that. And you launch, and if you are thoughtful and you work hard at it and you focus on the things that are important, over time, you will get the resources that'll allow you to put it back into the business and to, you know, up your production value. And the important thing is just you go and you do it. And then you start making it better. Doesn't have to be perfect on day one. I know too many people who are held back because they question. It's not even just endeavors like this. It's like any small, you know, entrepreneurial endeavor. Sometimes you just got to jump into it and go like, I don't know what the temperature of the pool is. It may be shocking when I get in there, but I'll get used to it. And then if I don't like it, I'll get out. That's going to be the name of my book, my business book. If I don't like what the pool feels like, I'll get out. That's it for phone calls, folks. Sorry. Apologies. If you've been holding, tried to not have people hold for very long. I feel like maybe we got to do like a whole show of just phone calls at one point. All right, I'm going to do about 8 more IMs, then we'll get out of here. I love Sarah Palin. I hope these Democratic primary voters are taking notice about this whole Trump-Ukraine thing. I don't know if I would agree that the primary voters pay more attention to the political media landscape than a general election voter. Trump, Fox News, and the rest of the right-wing media are telegraphing part of their strategy on Biden. Throw out conspiracy theories like they did with Hillary. Uranium One, Huma Abedin being part of the Muslim Brotherhood, Benghazi, then pound doubt into people's head until they are so confused they don't show up. The Ukraine thing is just the tip of the iceberg, and when he proposes policy in the debate stage with Trump, Trump is just going to keep saying, you were in the Senate for 30 years, why didn't you do it already? Trump's general election strategy isn't going to be convincing voters, it's going to be disempowering people who might vote for a Democrat. Mehdi Hassan. That's exactly right. I mean, that's what we've been saying, right? It's not a persuasion election, it's a mobilization election. Trump's agenda is going to be to depress the Democratic vote, and that is why, that is my point about when you run on the playing field that Donald Trump wants you to run on. And that is, you say you're a good guy, I say I'm a good guy. You're going to have a problem because he's just going to spend all the time saying you're a bad guy. You can say I'm a bad guy, but unfortunately for you, when a liberal says that about conservatives, more conservatives show up to vote. But when a conservative says it about liberals, liberals actually listen and maybe they stay home. That's why we're better people. I'm saying, broadly, left and right, and I'm being a little bit facetious. But I think people are more sensitive on the left. I mean, look, they convinced 87% of evangelical Christians to vote for a guy who is, by all accounts, very unchristian. But they thought he could deliver. And not deliver on being a good person or this and that, but a material benefit to them, which was a Supreme Court justice or 2 or 3. The Democrat who runs against Donald Trump needs to lead with policy. Needs to lead with stuff, and by policy, I'm speaking very broadly. It doesn't have to be like very, narrow and technocratic and complicated and hard to sell. They have to lead with ideas that are outside of them. They have to lead, they have to, and by lead, I don't even mean like leading people. I mean, start with. The primary thing that has to be out there is you make Donald Trump box. Not with you. You make him box with ideas. I don't mean to sound Dave Rubin about this, but make him box with Medicare for all. Make him go out there and make the case as to why Americans don't want to lose their private health insurance. It may be easy for Pete Buttigieg to say that, but it's not easy for Donald Trump to do that on a sustained basis. I'm sorry, how many of those things do you think he can remember? But he does know how to go out there and say, no, he's a bad guy. No, he says he's a good guy. I say he's a bad guy. It's just like, how would you win a debate with a 6-year-old? Honestly, how would you win a debate with a 6-year-old? You would start talking about stuff that the 6-year-old doesn't understand because they get disoriented. Whenever Saul is misbehaving, I just start talking to him like I would talk to a guest on the show. And he doesn't know what the hell is going on, and he stops, freezes, he locks up. What's he going to do? Can't argue this stuff. He actually, when he's mad at me, he says, you're the worst dad ever. You're worse than Donald Trump. Yep. And then I say stuff like, so are you suggesting that I would force California to have lower emission standards for their cars?
He's got nothing.
He's got nothing. He just looks at me like he doesn't know what I'm talking about. Because he doesn't. BB Teach, how much of China's trash is making shit for us to consume? Indeed. Ben, does Michael have permission to skip work at least once a week? Unreliable co-host. That was actually, that was a conversation this morning too. I did. Chris from Taiwan. Bernie's plans are simpler and more straightforward than Warren's, but if you actually read them, they're no less specific or detailed. I think Warren is widely perceived as being more specific with her plans, is that she chooses to emphasize the wonky details, whereas Bernie chooses to emphasize the broader values and vision behind his campaign. Yes, and I think part of the reason why Warren's been effective with it is that I do think that there is a very strong hunger right now for competence. That a big thing that people feel about Trump when they are not ideological people is that he doesn't know what he's doing. And so somebody who comes in and says, I know what I'm doing, I think gives them comfort. Jonathan Armstead, years ago, I saw a meme online that said slavery was socialism as it promised jobs, housing, and healthcare to all the slaves. I literally couldn't even. Also, thank you for Sam for saying that Saving Private Ryan stunk. Also, I've saved up your crystal ball interview to watch after the show. What do you think of her? She had a turn in 2015 where she was very adamant that Hillary Clinton was problematic. And I was very surprised by that. I could not follow what that was. And I think that, I don't know if she was, but now I think she's great. I mean, I think to have someone who's presenting a left voice on a platform like that is great. All in favor of it. All in favor of it. I mean, I don't, I can't, I'm not going to claim that I know all her positions on stuff, but broadly speaking, I think it's good. Sweardatha. Do you think that Warren's rise in the polls is a reflection of her debate performance? I like Bernie, but he just doesn't seem to be as good at this stuff as she is. I think she's hit her stride to a certain extent. I mean, Bernie's, in New Hampshire, Bernie is statistically tied for first, and I think Biden is falling. In Nevada, Bernie is in first place. In California, Bernie is very close to Biden. I think there's a perception that Warren has this momentum because Bernie's been more or less static or slowly creeping up. But I think that's a perception enhanced by the fact that a lot of times, you're just not hearing much about Bernie in the mainstream media. Now, I got to be honest with you. I think the bottom line is going to be to see if Bernie's strategy of organizing on the ground with, it's almost like social justice unionism, like building relationships with communities that are tangential to the presidential election. If they come back and deliver, that's going to be the test. I think we're going to see this in Iowa. Right now, it looks like Iowa, that Bernie's in third, that Buttigieg is right on his heels. it may be the case. It also may be the case that in a caucus state, when we have a different dynamic with the electorate, 2014 to 2018, you had double the amount of college students that came out. That's just unheard of. If a similar dynamic is happening on the ground, polls wouldn't necessarily catch it. It could also be the case that the polls are exactly right. And Pete Buttigieg is a favorite of a second pick for a lot of people. And Pete Buttigieg could come in second in Iowa. I mean, who knows? I don't know. We'll know a lot more after Iowa and New Hampshire, I think. Spacco. Did the Pentagon give the kingdom a 10% discount for paying cash for the protection contract? Did the Saudis put out RFP for their protection contract? Did Blackwater bid? Was our military low bid? Does Trump expect we will make money on the back end with cost overruns and extensions? Did anyone check to see how much money the kingdom paying for the protection contract? Yeah, I mean, these are all, I have no idea what kind of oversight we're getting these days. Nick in Pittsburgh. Nate Silver said a little bit more than that, y'all. He called the people Sanders has with him the residue left behind, because if the white liberals who went to Warren, the others he specifically said Warren, think we shouldn't leave out what he called the diversity of Sanders' base residue, which is incredibly disgusting. Yeah, he's gotten super creepy.
I wonder if Nate's on an all-meat diet, too.
It's a little bit creepy. D. Canfield, hey, Sam, I saw my first Andrew Yang bumper sticker today, right next to the Don't Tread on Me flag and the Reddit alien. And the final IM of the day. Mark Monkey TV, MUNKY. Hey guys, just letting you know, I'll be streaming live from one of the sites of the UAW strikes in Flint. I will ask them about a fund for helping with cut benefits. Tune in at 10 a.m. Eastern to watch twitch.tv/Mark, MARCMUNK Monkey, KY. Thank you all. Left is best and solidarity forever. Appreciate it. All right, folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.